All right, good morning, and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. This is Rachel Marshall and Bruce Wayner, and we are going to talk with you today about a conversation that I think is often missed in the financial planning space, and that is how to make sure that your spouse is prepared financially, really to step into what might happen if you are no longer there. And so we're talking about what happens when the spouse doesn't know the financial advisors, maybe doesn't even know what's going on financially in your life, and you want to be in a position of really equipping and preparing them to be able to take over, step into what is left behind financially and not have to fumble and not have to be concerned and not know what to do. And so this is really a conversation about how to not just leave a legacy and an inheritance to your children and your grandchildren, but how to first make sure that your spouse is protected and equipped to handle the financial resources that eventually one day they probably will be in charge of. Bruce, thank you for joining me for this important conversation today.
Yeah, this is actually really related to our main theme all the time of becoming your own banker, because Nelson actually had a conversation with Mary on a drive home one time, and he made the comment to Mary, his wife, "I need to teach you how to be a widow." And from that point on, it was one of his main objectives to make sure that Mary knew everything about how to be a widow. And I know that sounds a little weird, and it's not just about, in Nelson's mind, it wasn't just about how much money they had or how much life insurance he had. It was about how to deal with the different financial aspects of their life. And we're going to review those today. So, as a financial advisor, I've seen this over and over when I have meetings with a couple. Oftentimes, it's the wife that may even be, highly competent, highly confident, and yet she says, "Oh, I don't understand anything about money. I'm just going to let him do everything." And my immediate response is, "No, I will not accept that. You need to understand what's going on." And oftentimes, the spouse will say, "I just don't understand numbers. I don't get how all this works." And I will say, "Yes, I know. That's why I'm here to teach you how it all works." And it's very important, because if you can understand the quantitative aspects of it, then during times of the emotional aspect of losing a spouse, it will help you greatly have the confidence to move on.
Bruce, I think that's so powerful. As we talk to people in all different areas of finance and money and legal planning and legacy planning and thinking about what they want to do financially for their children and their grandchildren, there is that conversation that usually happens at the beginning, and it is how involved are both spouses. And usually what happens is either and this is more rare, I would say. The rare component is both spouses are very much completely involved, both knowledgeable, both making decisions together. That's, I would say, ideal,
Mhm.
but it's rare. And what we often see is, well, maybe one's not involved at all, or one just says, I'm going to trust the other one to make the decisions. Whatever they say is going to be fine. And the real truth is that in any big decision, both spouses need to be able to be on the same page. I've rarely seen one spouse be able to make a decision without the other one having some buy-in and some say in the matter. And so we're always talking about how to make sure that you're bringing everything that you're doing to the other spouse, getting their buy-in, getting their feedback, getting their input. Would you change anything? Do you like what's happening? Do you see any holes in this? Really, because it's important to not just have your personal finances or your personal planning on track, but you really want to be in a position that you're moving forward in unison together as a couple. And Bruce, I think this conversation is extremely relevant. Even talking to attorneys on the legal side of things, I hear often that what happens is one spouse passes away, the other spouse is then looking for who to trust, who to depend on, who to help them make decisions now in this new position that they're in, where they have to make decisions and they have to be faced with the facts that maybe they weren't involved in before. And often that leads to switching advisors, switching not just financial advisors, but legal advisors too, and sometimes being completely thrown into a tailspin of not having any idea how to function in a new environment. I heard a story actually just last week from someone in the legal profession, the legal side of things with the estate planning side, and they said that they heard of somebody who came to them. They had been working as a cashier and thought that that was the type of lifestyle and type of finances that their family um, was exposed to, was in. That was their financial situation. The spouse passed away, the husband died, and the wife found out that he had $30 million dollars. And she had no idea that they had that kind of net worth or what to do with it. And she was completely put into a completely different environment. And I would say that that's not ideal. You want to be knowledgeable and informed. And so today we're really talking about how to make sure that your wife, specifically, or your husband, but usually it's the husband that's making these decisions, and the wife is usually the one who's either trusting or I wouldn't say in the dark, but usually they're saying, I'll let him make those decisions and I'll just trust and you make the choices. Unfortunately, then they end up being the ones that are left in the dark later if they're not brought alongside and included in that conversation. So today really what we're talking about is how to make sure that you have a practical and emotional framework to make sure that your spouse is not only knowledgeable but protected, equipped, and not alone in carrying the weight of your finances, your family's finances, your legacy, all of the financial decisions that at some point will need to be made by one or other spouse.
Yeah. So to put this in a framework today, um, and this is easier said than done, but you really need to engage in all aspects of your financial life. And I just wrote down several of them. You need to be engaged in not only the current income plan, but the alternative income plan when one spouse actually passes away, or what the income plan was going to be when you retire. The second one would be the tax plan, which many people don't even have a tax plan, but you should be engaged in that. The third one would be the protection plans. And protection has to do with a lot more than just the life insurance. So obviously life insurance is important, but then the health insurance, disability, car insurance, home insurance, liability insurance, all those insurances that help you live your life without having any fear, whether it's a real fear consciously or a fear that's subconscious. Um, and then, of course, the legacy plan. How are you going to pass your assets to the next generation? And then this is one that I find that people overlook. So much of our lives right now are electronic. And so if one spouse is doing everything electronically and they don't share the um, the IDs and passwords to certain financial institutions, it takes a lot longer to access those. I don't know about any other cell phone companies, but Apple actually allows you to have a legacy contact in their phones, and so you can actually tap on settings, tap your name, you can access to the and navigate to the password and security settings, excuse me, select legacy contact and put that legacy contact in there. And that legacy contact then would get a QR code. They can take the QR code and the death certificate and they can take it to Apple, and Apple will then allow them to access whatever's on that phone because you have
Bruce,
given
I didn't
permission.
know that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, The workaround that we've used in our family is Lucas and I know each other's phone passwords, and we also store everything in one password so that we have access through an external password saving location that we can access everyone else's, each other's devices, phones, accounts, passwords for every single thing. But I love that. I did not know that that was an option with Apple phone
Yeah,
specifically.
and obviously that's a great way of doing it, Rachel, but I would say most people are not as highly disciplined about passwords and things as especially Lucas is, and then of course yourself. But Lucas is just he's a freak when it comes to understanding passwords because of his
It's
background.
kind of a wizard, yes. And
Yes,
so he saw the need for us to manage passwords. And I mean, honestly, that just is so cumbersome in today's world. I mean, do you know
yes.
the number of times that you create an account somewhere, you forget the password? Oh, I thought I did this one that I normally do. Well, that's not high enough, I don't know, security for a certain website. And so you have to add characters and upper lowercase numbers and all the things. And then all of a sudden you forget what that password is or where you wrote it down, which paper you shoved it on and stuck in your desk somewhere. And so yes, Lucas found one password, and I hear a lot of people using something similar or using that itself. I would highly recommend it. We don't get paid to say this; it's not an endorsement, but it's a really powerful tool to be able to share passwords with the people that are most important. And it's one, the number one, and then password. You can use that for business passwords. You can use it for family passwords. We even have some that we share with our daughter for accounts that she can access, some that just Lucas and I share. And so it's a really, really great way to securely store data like that.
Yeah, so to set the table a little bit more as far as wealth planning goes, what's interesting about this is that there are certain aspects of a person's financial life that actually changes greatly, obviously going from two to one person. Um, the your tax preparation actually changes because you're going from married filing jointly to a single tax code. And although they've brought them more in line um, throughout the years, there still are significant implications on that. The second thing is for your Medicare payments, which are affected by the what are called the IRMA brackets, income replacement monthly adjusted amount. And what that basically, we won't go into that today, but what that basically means is the more that you actually make, the more you actually have to pay. And those IRMA brackets are different for single filers than they are for joint filers. And it can be a very significant amount of different, it could add as much as close to $500 a month with your Part B or your Part D premium. And so that would be equivalent to, close to $6,000 a year.
And
So
that's more that you pay when you're
correct,
single?
correct. Because if you're
Okay.
pushed up in a single bracket higher, because of that, then the government says you're making more money. So the IRMA brackets will now be applied to you. Basically, like I said, we're not going to get into it today, but the more you make nowadays, the more you have to pay for your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. And like I said, that's not for this podcast, but that's something to be aware of. And oftentimes people are thrown in that position. And of course, then when um, you have qualified money or tax deferred money going from one spouse to another spouse, and that spouse also has qualified money. And we have a required minimum distribution situation. There is a provision that it can become a spousal IRA, which means it now becomes literally your money under your social security number, not your ex-spouse's, or not ex-spouse, deceased spouse, excuse me, deceased spouse. And that may change your planning because if you're younger or older, you now have to take the required minimum distributions based upon your age. So if you're older, you might have to start it even faster. If you're younger, you might have some great planning opportunity because now you can plan several years in advance. There is another provision that happens. It's when the spouse is actually 10 years or older than the deceased spouse. Now the spousal money does not become a spousal IRA, it becomes a beneficiary IRA, which has significant. Now, luckily, it doesn't happen that often, but it does in today's society that one of the spouses may be 10 years younger, especially in a um, second marriage situation. And the significance of that is now with the Secure Act 2.0, you actually have to take a beneficiary IRA not over your lifetime, so that you can spread it out and have less required minimum distributions. You actually have to take it out over only 10 years. So when you divide it over 10 years now, you're going to have to put more money on top of your single filing status. And that could cause you not only to pay more taxes, but now affect the IRMA brackets again for your Medicare payments. So
Mm.
knowing all this in advance and planning for it is very, very helpful in your financial life.
Well, Bruce, I mean, just along that, I mean, there's so much packed into what you just said. So let's just recap really quickly. You said current income plan, your alternative income plan, your tax plan, your protection plans, which is all your insurances, your legacy plan, how you're passing to the next generation. You mentioned IDs and passwords. And I would add in there your advisors. And this is maybe not a category alike to everything else that you mentioned, but if you are a person who is married and you're doing the planning and you have your trusted advisors, maybe you have your investment advisor, maybe you have your insurance advisor, maybe you have your tax team, it's really important for you to make sure that your spouse knows those people. Not only, I mean, it would be ideal if they're sitting in meetings with you and they're face to face with these advisors and they're in the conversation, even if they might not be, I don't know, loving all the content that you're hearing, and they might not be as enthusiastic about all of the moves and the decisions that you're making as you are. They might not even understand it as well. But if they have the relationship with that advisor, then they will know who to turn to and who to trust and who to help them continue making decisions so that whatever plan you're putting in place now is not going to be thwarted or turned over to somebody else who is maybe not like-minded. You really want, if you're setting in plans right now that you want to continue lasting, the advisors who are helping you make those decisions, you want to make sure that they're the advisors advising your spouse after you're gone. But Bruce, when you're kind of breaking down that tax piece here, you're mentioning the tax bracket itself. You mentioned Medicare. There's, you mentioned qualified plans. There's also Social Security and the way that income affects Social Security payments. And if you were getting Social Security on yourself or your spouse, can you just speak to that kind of broadly as well in what you might need to be aware of when it comes to Social Security changes?
Yeah, so let's talk about the basics of Social Security when one spouse actually passes. So in the United States, under current Social Security laws, if you work 40 credit hours, and we won't get into those specifics, but it's basically 10 years because a quarter of a year, as long as you make so much money in that quarter, you will get one credit. So if you work 10 years, you will be eligible for some type of Social Security. And that Social Security can be enhanced if you work more than 10 years. That seems obvious. Um, but it's a fairly complicated formula where they look at 35 years and they average those 35 years, but then they just don't divide it and multiply it. There's actually tier systems that they use, and they also, more importantly, index the money that you had coming in that year. So to simply explain that, in 1990, if you made $50,000, they will turn it into 2025 money as far as cost of living adjustments to do the calculations. So um, that all figures into it. So then you get a Social Security payment. If you take it when you are at your full retirement age, um, that is called your FRA or full retirement age. Then your spouse, if they take their Social Security at full retirement age, what they will do is they will look at Social Security Administration will look at it and see whether your spouse record is greater than 50% of your spouses at the full retirement age. And you will receive the higher of the two incomes. So I always like to use my mother and father as an example. When my father started his years ago, over 20 years ago, he was receiving somewhere around $1,600 a month. And my mother, who did not work a whole lot, because she was raising us, which was kind of the rule at that time in the 60s. So she didn't, so she did not have a very big Social Security payment. So because then when she took hers at full retirement age, she was able to get whatever my father's amount was, about 1650, I think it was. So she got 825 instead of her smaller amount, which was about $400. So,
Mm.
but now if she would have worked more and then gotten $1,200 a month, then she would have gotten the higher of the two payments. So that's how base Social Security works. When you actually pass away, or one of the spouses passes away, then you don't get both benefits. You get the higher of the two benefits. So if
Oh, okay.
my father were to pass before my mother, now the over the last 20 plus years, their Social Security benefits have increased. But if my father were, because his is the higher of the two benefits, my mother would get what's equivalent to his benefit, but then her benefit goes away.
Mm.
Technically, if there's any like real technical people on this podcast today, technically what happens is my mother still gets her benefit, but then she gets enough of my father's benefit to equal my father's benefit. Uh,
Okay.
I don't know why they technically do it like that,
Hmm.
and you never see it. You don't really even care. The Social Security Administration does it like that. So you get to hire the two benefits. Now, there are different things that you have to um, I'm sure people are on the podcast say, well, wait a minute, that's not the way we did it. We actually filed one benefit and then we suspended that benefit, and then my wife got her or my husband got his benefit, and we let our hours grow, and then we turned it back on. That was called file and suspend. So that is instilled in people's mind. They actually eliminated that part of the Social Security law about 8 years ago. So if you've heard that and you thought you were going to be able to do that because you're getting close to Social Security benefit age, that is no longer part of the law. So you cannot file and suspend. We won't get into the details of that because it's no longer part of it. But you need to have a Social Security expert to walk you through that.
Mm. Okay, that's really valuable. Now, there's so much more that was packed into what you were mentioning earlier. And Bruce, can you just kind of walk us through what, from your perspective, is needed in terms of making sure that your spouse is aware of your current income plan and your alternative or your future, your contingent, your backup income plan?
Let's talk with an acronym I like to use with my clients called LIFE. So the L for life stands for liquid. So how much money do you feel comfortable actually being liquid and what we call 15-minute money? You can get your hands on that money in 15 minutes. Different spouses have different comfort levels about that. So they'll say, "Oh, I don't care. I don't want to have any money in the bank. I want it all invested." One spouse might say. The other spouse might say, "No, I want to be able to get my hands on $10,000 in a case of emergency." Some people's comfort level is $50,000. So that's the first part of life. You need to determine what your number is for liquid. The income plan is what you decide you need for your income. And people, I mean, that sounds obvious, but income means different things to different people. So the first thing is some people say, the income I want is for my fixed bills, my mortgage, my electricity, my insurance payments, everything that is the same every month. Other people say, no, I've already figured out my discretionary income, my variable income needs, such as eating out, clothing, gifts to my grandchildren, so on and so forth. So you have to be on board what income means. Is it just your fixed cost? And then you're going to pull from different buckets of money for your variable cost? Or do you want actually money to come into your checking account because you say, well, on average, I need 10,000 a month, 12,000 a month, and I'll decide from that money coming in to put a little bit aside to take care of those variable costs. And then the other question you need to ask yourself is, of that income, how much of that do you want to actually be guaranteed money? And people were like, initially, people will say, a lot of my clients will say, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will say, well, I want it all to be guaranteed money. And that is possible, but a lot of times that's not realistic. The way you can get guaranteed money is number one, Social Security is all intents and purposes guaranteed. If you have a pension from either a private corporation, which there are not very many of those anymore, or from a government institution, that's basically guaranteed money. Now, there's some provisions on the private that they could go under, and then you have to go into what's called the pension guarantee, and that only guarantees about 65% of the pension in most cases, but it's basically guaranteed money. And then you could go to an insurance company and get some type of an annuity. You could get that has a income rider on it, or you could ladder those annuities so that you can have guarantees coming in. Some financial advisors would say we could also use a bond ladder, which provides guarantees coming in. Now, the guarantee is not about the value of the bond, but the yield from the bond coming in by the United States government. So most commonly, though, people say, I want to take an insurance company to provide me an annuity income for that for a certain amount. A lot of people choose their fixed cost. They say, I know what I have to have. I need $7,000, 8,000. I want that to be fixed. I want another 4,000, 5,000 a month to be variable. We'll actually get that from other places. So that's how they do their income plan. The income
Bruce, let's
plan
just
can be from cash flowing investments
mm,
or from appreciation. Some people are more comfortable with cash flowing investments. Some people say, well, no, I want to have it in appreciating it, and I will just live off the appreciation. There's pros and cons to both of those that we probably won't get into today. So that's the I. Go ahead, Rachel, and then we'll go.
yeah, there's just so much packed into this. And I think the first big picture is that the reason it's so valuable and necessary to have both spouses in the conversation is that, I mean, Bruce, how many times have you talked to a husband and wife who have exactly the same ideas before you talk to them about all of these things, and they agree 100% on all these matters? I'm guessing it's probably none. So
Thank you for bringing it up because I was going to bring that point up earlier and I forgot. So one of the things that we like to do at our firm is we actually like to have people fill out their ideas of how money works or how they want the money. We have them fill it out separately. And when it comes to how much you want guaranteed in your life acronym, how much you want liquid, the F part is flexible. How much money do you want to be not not necessarily liquid right away, but flexible that you can use in different aspects of your life instead of your income plan. So, you might say, I want this to be for long-term investments. I want this to be for short-term investments. I want this to be for part of my legacy planning process. And then the E part of it is your estate. How are you going to pass this around? So that's the life acronym we use. Life for liquid, I for income, F for flexibility, and E for estates. And we like to actually do those separately because And whenever possible, we also like to do it when they're not talking to each other. Because no matter what, either in a negative view where a person is overbearing, or in a loving view where a person just wants to appease the other spouse, people will not say what's really on their mind when they're in front of somebody, their other spouse. So we like to do it separately and then just gather that information separately so we have them to see what's truly the ideas. Now they can come together on their thoughts, but then once one of them is out of the picture, deceased, then obviously then we would shift to what that other person
Mm.
feels is much more important.
Bruce, I think that you're talking about a psychological relational dynamic that's really important to understand when you come into a planning conversation, because ultimately, if you're married and you're handling your money together for the sake of the group that you're both benefiting from, you have to ultimately make decisions. And I think that decision making has to match what everyone needs, but also ultimately you're going to have to make a choice that might have pros and cons, and it might be more in favor of the one person's viewpoint than the other. But all of this is really important because, first of all, you need to recognize that you have differences. The differences then can be a different lens to look at the problem, the situation, the thing that you're solving, and then you need to understand how those things work. I mean, I can just even imagine if one spouse is saying, well, I really need a lot of guaranteed income and I need that to cover fixed and variable to have my comfort level be there. Well, that is going to sway them more towards guaranteed annuities, and you're going to end up putting money in different assets than if somebody said, well, I really just need very little guarantees only for the fixed, and everything else I really want to have appreciation for the sake of legacy planning and having a larger estate, and they're maybe more thinking about tax mitigation or thinking about how to handle estate taxes in the future. And so first of all, just the awareness of two spouses recognizing what is at stake, what is our perspective, what do we actually want? I mean, that's clarifying in itself, even before you come to the table of presenting solutions and having to make decisions on what you're going to do with that. But I think that's really clarifying for somebody to understand the viewpoint of the other person, and not from a right wrong versus, I'm right and my way is most important and you're wrong in your decisions or your desires, your perspective, your wants, but really just being able to recognize the differences that someone has. And I think that if you can handle those differences, you can have a position of strength because you're going to solve for everything that the whole family needs rather than just being, one-sided or blind-sided to things that might not be as concerning to you personally.
Yeah, it's a very, I wouldn't say necessarily very difficult thing to talk about, but it's a very emotional thing to talk about. Uh,
Hmm.
Nobody wants to be dismissed about their emotions, you know, and that's what happens when, especially a male who tends to be a little more logical, would say, well, historically, this is what happens, so let's just go with the historical part of it. And the wife who tends to be a little bit more emotional, and I know I'm painting with a broad brush, but I'm also painting with 6,000 appointments that I've been on over my career.
And human nature. I mean, I think maybe some people might fall outside of those
Yeah,
norms, if you will, but I think the woman usually in our experience as well, they're more so thinking about the family, the kids, they're wanting things to, they're not necessarily wanting to rock the boat as much. They're maybe wanting to have things stable and secure and certain. And again, that might also be stereotypical the way that I'm saying that, but I think it's fair and good to be able to say that this is the general thing that we do see. So go ahead, Bruce.
yeah. And so what ends up happening is, if you could talk through the couple of what we call safety, liquidity, and growth. So when you get safety, a lot of times you get liquidity, but you don't get a lot of growth. If you get safety for income purposes, You also might not get the liquidity because an annuity has um, li some liquidity issues. You can get to about 10% of it if you need it. Without that, you're going to have to pay a penalty. Doesn't mean it's not totally liquid. On the other hand, a blue chip stock, you're going to have great liquidity. You can buy and sell it every day. Historically, it does grow, but there's no safety aspect to it. So you have to talk through what you're trying to accomplish in that emotional state. You can also use what we talk about all the time, cash valued life insurance for safety. It is liquid, but in the early years, it doesn't grow as much. So, but you can use it for your liquid money and you can use it for your flexible money. And of course, you can use it for your estate planning. The
Bruce,
income,
it almost feels like, I mean, and I hope that this doesn't come across too one-sided, but I think one of the reasons why life insurance is such a valuable tool is that I think it hits a lot of the needs that are even maybe opposing needs that a couple or a spouse may have. If you're saying, well, I really want to make sure that there's money available for the kids to go to college, the cash value life insurance can do that. If you really want to make sure that you're mitigating taxes in your estate planning, life insurance can do that. If you're looking to make sure that you have income, cash value life insurance can be a piece of that because you can use the cash value to invest in something for income, or you can take income in the later years from a cash value life insurance policy. I mean, I'm sure we could go on and on, but I think that that's why it ends up being a cornerstone or a foundation for a lot of the financial planning because it can do so many things, even when spouses might have different competing objectives that they have financially.
and our friend Dr. Wade Fowle, who's been on the podcast several times, he actually says, and he's not a life insurance guy, he's a managed money guy, but he says life insurance actually can allow you to live your greater life by spending more of your equity portfolio without the fear of it running out over two lives, because once one life then passes, you get to fill the bucket back up in your equity portfolio. And so he really likes it as far away as a way to actually enhance your retirement while you're still both alive. So you get to spend more. The other thing that it can do is help with tax mitigation, and not just from what people think. People think, oh, well, it actually grows tax free, so I have to pay any taxes. Well, no, what actually you can do is you can actually access that instead of accessing the other taxable buckets, such as your brokerage account or your tax deferred bucket, when you need something, whether it's a vacation or putting on a new roof, and it will not push the rest of your income into a higher tax bracket, which could include the IRMA brackets, which will cause you to pay more on your Medicare Part B and Part D. So that flexibility allows you, if you understand how it all works in concert, to live a better life. And that's what actually happens then when you get this tax-free money passed along to the next generation, that they can actually access that to solve some of the problems we talked to at the very beginning of the podcast.
Oh my goodness, I feel like we still could go so many places with this. So, Bruce, that life acronym is really powerful, clarifying to understand the different places that you need money to be able to access. You've got the liquid, you've got your income plan, flexible money, and estate money that you're passing along. So that's thinking about what you need in your current lifetime and also what you want to do after you, which is something that you need to come to an agreement with a spouse to figure out what exactly that's going to look like as well. But ultimately, everyone wants the best of both worlds. They want to be able to have the most today and the most to pass on. So, Bruce, coming back to your original schematic or your framework for thinking financially about all of the things that you're going to have awareness, a spouse is going to need awareness of to be able to make decisions once they're in the position of having to be the primary decision maker financially. You said current income plan, alternative income plan. Does everything that you just discussed cover the alternative income plan, or do we need to talk about more things? on that.
No, the alternative income plan would be um, if that second spouse. And by the way, I can actually bring this up. Warren Barnes, who's a great contributor to the podcast, he says this entire topic is an area of great personal challenge for me as I have a wife with a lower level of financial literacy combined with a severe brain injury,
Mm.
and she still wishes to be in control. And what happens, what I mean by an alternative plan, is that the Warren obviously loves his wife, and he recognizes the fact that she may not be able to be in a great situation, both mentally and emotionally, to make good plans. So he's shifting it more to guaranteed income for her, so that when he passes, and if he passes before her, then that's the alternative plan. Now, Warren may not be using the guaranteed money now. I have another really good friend who's they're both successful doctors. One of them, the male, is actually retired already. The female doesn't desire to retire for a while yet, and he is the one of the most, like, I shouldn't say most aggressive, but one of the more like typical income planning person. Let's just put it into ETFs, dividend paying stocks. Let's hope that the ETFs appreciate in value like they have over 50 years, and let's hope that the dividend paying stocks are kicking out dividends for income purposes. His wife, on the other hand, does not care about any of this stuff. And so now he's worried when he passes, how is she going to juggle all this? So he said to me, what can I do for this? And I said, well, we could set her up with a big annuity that's just going to have income coming in every month. She doesn't have to worry about it. But his emotional attachment to not only appreciation, the possible appreciation of his assets could not allow him to do that. That along with
Today, right?
yeah,
Or,
I
I
mean,
mean, but once he passes, she could put all of that into that,
but there's
right?
the advantage with insurance companies. If you get the money to them earlier rather than later, they will actually give you more guaranteed income into the future if they get it earlier rather than later. And so he emotionally can't get over that. So that's an alternative income plan that she could have that they don't have right now. So that's what I was talking about. Alternative is it's about the emotional attachment of how your plan is.
Mm. Bruce, I think uh, just this whole conversation is so valuable. I mean, Warren Barnes, I see you commenting again. He says, for the benefit of our family, I do certain things she does not agree with. For example, she does not value life insurance, yet I believe that it is extraordinarily helpful for our family's security. And Bruce, I'm sure you see this even more than I do, but in all of the people we talk to, that I talk to about legacy planning, and the ones that are interested in legacy planning, or sometimes I talk to people on the calendar before they end up getting over to our financial team, we often see these kinds of disparities where one spouse is really wanting to do maybe more so typical planning. They might say, I just put it in my qualified plan and I don't think about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about money now. I don't want to think about money in the future. We'll just, just do whatever's easiest, whatever everyone else is doing, just the path of least resistance, and hopefully it all works out. And then you have another spouse who really wants to be making decisions that are really going to optimize their financial life. They might want to take advantage of alternative investments. They might be wanting to do some tax planning. They might really be proactive in thinking, maybe even like Warren is thinking about life insurance. And so look, can you just speak to that for a moment, Bruce, especially when you have maybe two strong personalities that are wanting totally opposite things? What is the ideal path there? I know we've worked with some clients who have for themselves put action, proactive plans in place and have done as best as they can in their family. But I mean, this is on the maybe marriage counseling side of things that we don't do.
Well,
Exactly.
I mean, actually, any good financial planner is a marriage counselor.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this happens on a weekly basis. I don't want to say daily basis, but it happens on a weekly basis. And it's just like anything in a good marriage or a good relationship. you have to compromise. You have to honor the other person's emotional wishes. And that is just something that um, is just reality. Yes, so like, I'll use the two doctors example that I was talking about. Um, the one's a really strong personality. He's actually said to me, you can get five doctors into a room and ask them who are the three best doctors in this room, and they can't even get past themselves. So he recognizes, he's self-aware that he thinks he knows everything, but he can't do anything about it. Because he's brought this topic up to me on several occasions. And what's interesting is he's also talked about, well, I actually I actually researched this, and I know whoever does this annuity is going to make 5, 6, 7% on that money, and I don't know why they deserve to make that kind of money on this. And I say right back to him, well, I know you're one of the best radiologists, neuroradiologists around, and I could say the same thing. Well, you're just reading a scan. Somebody else would probably read the same scan, and they don't make as much as you do as that particular doctor. I said, so it's not about the fee, it's about getting what you want. If you get what you want, why does the fee matter? And this is emotional things for a lot of people. They're like, well, I don't want to pay for this. The other one says, we need to pay for this financial help in this situation. And there's even problems with that when you come with two spouses, because one of them sees the fee as being a way to whittle down their actual assets. The other one sees the fee as a way to grow their actual and protect their actual assets. So you got to talk them through that and what you're
Well,
getting in that
and
situation.
I think actually it seems that most of the time, both spouses, again, have different ways of seeing the same problem, and they're both right. But I almost think sometimes that, I mean, I've seen this in my own life, I've seen it in other situations as well, where maybe you actually do see the whole thing, but for the sake of the discussion, you almost have to pull in the opposite direction. Otherwise, how do I say this best? You might personally say, I see both. I see that we could pay this fee and it's going to cut into what we could grow. I also see that if we pay this fee, we might actually get what we're really looking for, which is going to move us ahead. But I think sometimes we can almost even play devil's advocate in relationships where we're, you know, taking whatever position the other spouse has and arguing the opposite, even though we might actually agree. And I think there's a lot of value in hearing the other person and acknowledging what they have to say because both are technically true. But if you're in a position of being able to make wise decisions and hire the right people and pay the right fees, you'll always be ahead. The problem is if you pay the wrong fees and you just waste money and you pay people who are not going to help you move forward. But I mean, you buy the healthy food, you get more valuable food to be healthier with. You pay for the more expensive doctor, more than likely you're going to be getting a more customized approach. You're going to have somebody who's more of an expert in their field. You're going to have a higher level of service. Usually, when you pay more, you are doing so because that is going to move you ahead in a greater capacity. And I'm not saying always the higher fee is better, but usually it is. And the higher fee is usually going to keep the person in business who was serving you in the first place so that they are sustainable and they are profitable and they can continue serving you. So,
Yeah, the best way to actually mitigate this, I found, is to ask each spouse, what would your solution be to this problem? And if they say, well, I don't know, I just think ours is the best way to go, or my idea is the best way to go about it. I don't know why she has this idea, or if she says, I don't want him to have any of the money in the market. I want it all to be in safe situations. Well, neither one are protecting the other's feelings, but almost 90% of the time they will say, well, I think a good compromise is we will determine how much we were going to have an aggressive growth from, and we will determine how much we can have guaranteed income from, and we can go in that direction. And then, of course, the alternative plan again is what I was just talking about is once one of the or the other spouse passes away, let's say they choose an annuity route. Well, there's a death benefit with that. So now the spouse it doesn't like the annuity route because it doesn't grow much as potentially they think it can. Well, now they can take the death benefit and put it all in the market if they want. The other is also true. If the spouse that is a really aggressive market person passes away and the person that's more conservative, now they're going to have control of the market money and they can put all or some of it. Well, they can't put all of it in according to regulations because you need it to be flexible, but you can put as much as you want in there according to regulations into an annuity. So that's what I was talking about alternative plans for each spouse.
Something's just coming into my mind, and it was you probably are never in this life going to have everything that you want and at the expense of other people. I mean, you're not going to be able to get 100% of what you were hoping for. But there's a verse in the Bible, and I'm not sure exactly where it's found, but it says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I mean, you ultimately, the best situation is that you got most of what you wanted and it was good enough, and you're at peace with the people around you. You're at peace with each other as you're making these decisions, because it's really important to recognize that maybe you did do everything that you thought was right. Maybe your spouse was also right, and you should have done a little bit more of what they had in mind because you were too aggressive and they were too, I don't know, too protective or too secure focused or wanting more stability. And maybe a common ground would have been what you actually needed to make things move forward. And all of us can only do the best thing that we can with the information that we're given, the spouses that we have, the knowledge that we have. And so if you're actively working to increase your knowledge and together with your spouse, you're both continuing to grow and make the best decisions, you can only look at the past and have peace that you've made the best decisions that you could have in the past, and look forward and say, how do we go forward? How do we move forward from here and make the best decisions going forward, and doing that
Yeah.
peacefully?
So I always say you make the decisions based upon the information that you have at the time you're making the decision. If you get different information, then you should not be afraid to make a different decision. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Warren actually says, sadly, most of the professional people I know seem to have no desire to provide legacy for their children or any kind of real family wealth. I regard them as selfish and they regard me as too money wealth oriented. It's a basic difference in values with respect to money and wealth. Your channel reminds me that I'm not alone. Well, Warren,
Mm.
thank you. You've been a very valuable in many aspects of our podcast to bring that perspective. And I think we do get cognitive dissonance where we kind of gravitate to people that that believe the same thing we believe. But I also think it's great to run into people that have different viewpoints, and so that you don't get pigeonholed into just doing something because that's the way you always thought you should be doing it. That actually brings in, I believe, more stress. And that's why if a couple can actually compromise, they can see the value of both ways of thinking. You do need some growth because, especially with our Federal Reserve continuing to print money, we are going to be devaluing the dollar at a faster rate than maybe some of the guaranteed income uh, financial products can keep up with. And so you're going to need some growth. However, with that growth also brings in volatility. And when you bring in volatility, that brings into the emotional part of it. Like, oh my goodness, uh, the world is ending right now, and we're never going to get out of that, which is also not true. So,
Mm.
for that perspective, Warren, and you're not alone. But I also do think there's a lot more people that do value wealth, being protected, and life insurance and other insurance products can play a really big part of a person's financial program so that they can feel good about the future and the legacy that they're going to be providing.
I think I can't believe how fast this episode went today. I think we covered a lot of ground. We started the conversation by talking about how to make sure that your spouse is equipped to make good decisions after you're gone so that your plan can continue to flourish and prosper and keep going in the same direction. And that requires you to have everyone talking about the plan. It requires a spouse who knows what your plan is and ideally is making that plan together with you, that you have made those decisions in unison and that they are they have the tools to pick up whenever you leave off. And either direction. I mean, that can be either direction in a family. You don't know what the future holds, but the best way that you can make decisions is to make them together and equip the other person to pick up the reins. And that goes all the way down to one of the pieces that you mentioned at the beginning, Bruce, which was having a way to share passwords and share the technical information so you can access each other's accounts and that you have all of the pieces available to pick up where the other leaves off. That also came full circle to making decisions together and being aware of each other's differences and recognizing them as strengths and coming to a form of compromise so that you can move forward in the best way possible. And so Bruce, I feel like there's probably still so much more to unpack with this, especially as you were going into protection and this whole idea of you can be really protected and you need to be really protected because you don't want to lose what you have, but you also want to make sure that both of you are on the same page with that. Because if you leave yourself open to exposure and risk and you're moving forward and you have a lot of aggressive, high growth, investments or stocks and you do not have your house protected, you can lose everything that you have built. So you don't just want to move forward, you want to make sure that you are also prevented from going backwards. And I think to just close this episode, and I'm sure that there's going to be other topics that are going to come off of this, it's really important to be on the same page, to be involved together in the conversation, and then be in a position where your spouse knows the advisors that you are working with and has that same relationship so that you're in a position where they can pick up and carry forward. It's also possible to ensure that you protect your spouse, provide all the income that they're going to need, all of the things that they need to handle their lifetime and also still leave a legacy. And so if you're looking at maximizing all of that, that's a piece that we can help you with as well, because you don't have to just live well today or just take care of your spouse or just leave an inheritance to your children. You can do all three of those things. Bruce,
Yeah.
is there anything that you
I
want
just
to
want
share
to
before we
acknowledge
close?
Connie
Oh,
Carn, who
yes.
said several things today, and um, she found this very valuable. Thanks, Connie, for commenting a couple times. The other thing is, Rachel, it hit me that maybe a good episode would be in the future is to take people through what we do as far as all the questions that people should consider when they're trying to make these decisions. And we could actually take them through an intake sheet that we use. And we have to always be careful of what we're putting out into the general public as far as SEC and a FINRA guidelines. But as long as we're just doing an informational thing of what you can consider, I think we'll be okay. We're not doing any financial planning over the airways because we have to take each person's individual situation into account. But I think we could do it in general
Mm-hmm.
about what kind of questions that you should be asking, or hopefully your tax person, your legacy protection person is should be asking you, and that would be a great episode, I think, in the near future.
Absolutely. Bruce, I think that is a foreshadowing for anyone who's listening of probably a very near episode coming to you. And so, if you have questions about this topic or thoughts that this has spurred on, please go ahead and drop a comment in wherever you're watching or listening to this episode. And if you have questions directly or personally for us, you can go ahead and email us at hello@themoneyadvantage.com. You can also book a call with our advisor team to just go ahead and start that conversation if you're ready for a planning conversation to look at your finances, to get on the same page with your spouse, to go through this process and make sure that you're making the ideal financial decisions. If you've heard something today through Bruce talking about all the different aspects of your finances to be thinking about and also to be planning for, we would love to be a part of that journey and that process for you. So you can go to themoneyadvantage.com and book a call with our advisors there, and we'd love to be a part of your process. Thank you so much. And in closing, please remember success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love. We'll see you next time.